You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 137. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting James Rosone, who is an Amazon top 100 best-selling author of the Red Storm series, the World War III military thriller series, among other series. He's an Iraq War veteran who has served 3.5 years in a combat zone as a military interrogator and contractor. He writes his books with his wife, Miranda Watson, and their latest book is The Monroe Doctrine, Volume 1, which was published on January 20th of this year. The second volume will be published March 30th and is available for pre-order right now. I enjoyed talking to James about his writing process, what it's like working with your spouse, how they manage their prolific output that publishes several novels a year, and a lot more. So stay tuned for that interview coming up here in just a moment. But first, a reminder to visit thrillingreads.com/links to rate and or review this podcast. You'll also find links to my author website, my Thrilling Reads mailing list, where you can access special deals and discounts on great books in the thriller, mystery, crime fiction genres, and a lot more. So check out thrillingreads.com/links. And if you're a writer, you've heard me talk a lot about Masterclass. I love that site. They offer some amazing classes for all types of writers, but especially for thriller, crime fiction writers. You can learn from Walter Mosley, David Baldacci, Dan Brown, and James Patterson. And you'll even be able to download James Patterson's outline for his best-selling novel, Honeymoon, to see how it's done. And I've talked about this before, but I decided to put together a video case study where I show you how James Patterson's masterclass on outlining has really helped me. So if you want to take a look at that, you can check it out at thrillingreads.com/outline video, all one word, thrillingreads.com/outline video. All right, here's my interview with James Rosone. How are you doing this morning, James?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I guess it's afternoon for you in Florida.
It is.
Did I butcher your last name? Is it Rosone?
Yep, Rosone.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to become an author and to actually write that first book?
Sure. So my background, I spent 10 years in the military and then another 8 years as a DoD contractor and then a couple years in the private sector. But I've always had a love for reading. I was an avid reader, usually would read, 3 to 5 books a month. Sometimes more, it depended on my schedule. But it got to a point where I wasn't finding the kind of books I want to read. So I decided, why don't I write these books? I did my graduate studies at Oxford, so we had to do a lot of writing for, your dissertation and things like that. And I decided, what, I can write, and just started writing the books based on the experiences I had in the military.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, they always say you write what you know, right?
Write what you know and know what you write. Exactly.
And so for those who aren't familiar with your books, can you describe your writing style? What can a reader expect from your books?
Sure. So we do have a pretty distinct writer's style in what we create. So first off, we're one of the few authors in this genre that actually doesn't use profanity or sexual content in our books. That's kind of a conscious decision that we've made to do that because I think it opens the aperture of who can read your books to a much wider audience, and people tend to like that. When we write military thrillers, I like to show it from 3 specific points of view. So one is the grunt level guy who, soldier on the ground, who has to go and implement the action. The next is usually the commander level where they're deciding what to do and how to do it. And then the third level is usually at that 30,000 foot strategic level of, okay, X is happening, so how do we counter it with Y? And I like being able to showcase that because a lot of authors write books and it's from one POV or one level. And you're always left wondering, well, what's going on over here? How did this happen? How did they move this? And I've always found that as an annoyance, I guess, on my part as a reader. And I figure, well, I'll solve that with my own books, and that's what I'll fill in. That's what I'll put in. I'll write like that.
Oh, yeah. You seem to really have hit a chord, too, because your books are so successful. You sold like hundreds of thousands of copies of your books at Amazon. This is amazing.
Yeah, and we've made the bestseller list. Hit number one and made bestseller in let's see, in Germany, Australia, the UK, India, um, a number of different countries many times. Usually, each of our releases will usually hit number one in those regions for a couple days to a week, sometimes a month.
What I also found fascinating when I first came through your work is you co-write your books with Miranda Watson, who is your wife, correct? Is that right?
Yeah, we're a husband wife writing duo, and so we
It's so
do write
cool.
everything together. Yeah, the whole business is done together like that.
So how's the workload divvied up for a team for when you guys are working?
Yeah, so I handle the actual creation of the book itself. So I'll write about 95% of the book. And then I also handle the marketing. And so my wife, she does the editing and conceptual developing a little bit, making sure that the characters are developed out, that everything flows together. And then she does a fair bit of editing, but then she's also the liaison, so to speak, between us and our professional editor. So we have a professional editing firm that we work with. They do a lot of New York Times best-selling authors that they work with, and when they come back with the changes or suggestions, then my wife is the one who handles dealing with all that and fixing that. So it is very much an assembly line process. I write the book. It'll take me 6 to 7 weeks to write a 550-page book. I write it, I hand it off to her, and then I start writing the next one. Then when I'm done with that, I hand it off to her, and I just keep going. And usually I'm about 2 or 3 books ahead of her. Like time when book one comes out, I'll usually be on book three or book four. And it's very much an assembly line process like that. And having a team where we work like this allows us to maintain a pretty robust 90-day schedule of books constantly coming out.
Oh yeah, that is awesome because yeah, that's so important nowadays. Especially if you're publishing your books independently, the readers really want books out at a quick pace.
They do, and what we've seen over 4+ years of doing this now is there really is a bit of a cliff. So when a book comes out, you've got about 45 days where you're going to make pretty solid, strong sales. And then from day 45 to usually day 65, 70 is when you start to see the decline. And then from 70 to 90 is when you're starting to panic. But if you plan it well, you have your pre-order up, you're racking up the pre-orders at this point. Um, then when the next book launches, you launch with 2,000 or so immediate sales at full price. And then you carry the next 45 days as just, really high sales, and then it kind of peters back down. And initially, that that interim period of like the last 30 days, where the sales would get kind of scary, that was a lot harder to handle and deal with when we only had 7, 8, or 9 books out. But when you've got 22 books out, you tend to ride those waves a lot better. So now instead of it being lower, you're able to cushion that a little bit better because you have so many other books to rely on.
Yeah, fascinating. So yeah, so the important part out then, of course, of writing the books that people want to read and great stories like you guys, like you write, but is then just to keep it going, just to keep the momentum going, versus the old model, which is like one book a year, maybe.
That's not sustainable. I mean, maybe this
Yeah.
is a bad public, you're being paid, $250,000, $500,000 to write one book, but that's not really the mindset for a self-published author. It's all about building up your readership and acquiring more readers. When you have 15,000 readers who will buy everything you publish, you can survive and make a very good, solid six-figure income off of that kind of a readership base. And so the whole goal of it is to just continue to grow and build your audience and let your audience continue to expand and get larger.
So, can you tell us about your upcoming release? It's the Monroe Doctrine, Volume One. So, it's a new series.
This is a brand new series. So we finished our last series, the Falling Empires series that ended in May of this last year. We put up the pre-order to get this going, and then we had a sci-fi series that we ran for three books over the fall while we worked on creating this series and getting this series ready to roll. And so what I kind of look at is, future conflicts. Where are they? How will they be fought? How will they take place? So with the Monroe Doctrine, what we're really looking at is how the Chinese are going to be leveraging their Belt and Road Initiative to move into the U.S.'s sphere of influence, which is the Americas. So looking to move into Central America and South America with their Belt and Road Initiative. And that really comes into a direct confrontation with the U.S.'s stated Monroe policy that no foreign militaries can establish bases in our sphere of influence, and then also take economic control of a lot of these countries, which when the Chinese come in with the Belt and Road Initiative, they'll build a brand new port for, say, Croatia over in Split, Croatia. But when they do that, they're going to take 51% ownership of that port. And then when they build a new rail line connecting Split into the rest of Europe, they're going to take a 51% ownership stake in there. Well, when they have that kind of a stake, they can dictate policy, the nation's policy, because they can just shut things down too. And that's kind of a bit of a challenge and a problem. So the U.S. wants to prevent that kind of activity from taking place in our sphere.
Cool. So yeah, so that's what's really cool about your books too. That you actually you address some of the topics that are actually going on in the world. I remember your rigged book that I read a couple of years last year, I believe. But anyway, so that interests you guys? Is that something that interests you to write about?
Well, we like to write about relevant current things that are happening and going on because it makes the books more real when you're able to do that. We're very much into incorporating cutting edge technology and things that go on in warfare and how it's going to be fought. So in Monroe Doctrine, what we have is we also have a very heavy emphasis on artificial intelligence and machine learning. So the Chinese are in reality they're probably about a decade ahead of the United States and the rest of the West when it comes to machine learning and AI. So what if they developed a machine that could do predictive behavioral analysis to determine how an adversary would respond if their military did X, Y, or Z? If they knew with a certainty how the U.S. would respond, then it would embolden them to make those kinds of moves. And when their nation is leveraging a tool like that, it's essentially saying, okay, we can wage war now because this machine can tell us exactly how to wage this war properly to win every time. Our people are now tools to just affect the moves that the machine is telling them to make and to do. So we incorporate a lot of AI on the Chinese part, and then on the U.S. side, we're obviously including the next generation squad rifle that's being, they're phased out the M4s for the new rifles. So we get the 6.8 millimeter rifles for the infantry guys. We have America's 6th generation stealth fighter. It's the Archangel, what's going to be called. That's going to be coming into play, with its hypersonic capability, direct energy weapons, kinetic kill weapons that it's going to be using. So we integrate in a lot of technology that is very near term into the military. So you're getting to see what the future of a war is actually going to be fought, like how it's going to be fought, what it's going to be like to have to deal with drone swarm technologies. How is that 19-year-old soldier going to have to overcome, a swarm of killer drones that are being flown at his platoon? How do they deal with that? And that's something that we're probably going to see in reality in the next 10 years. But now you're going to get to read about it now and kind of get a picture of what could take place.
Kind of reminds me of that movie, The Terminator, when that came out in '84, when they showed the future with the machines and the robot Terminators.
I know. I remember seeing that. I was like, "Wow, that looks so cool."
Yeah.
Now I get to write books about it, so it's even better.
Yeah. So your background is so fascinating. Like you spent time in Iraq during the war. You were doing an interrogator, I believe, and a contractor. Can you tell us about that and how that's influenced your writing, and if your experiences from that make it into your books?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So when I was in the Air Force, I was working as a linguistic briefer, which is a kinder, gentler way of saying we were interrogators. So when we would capture, tier 1 Al Qaeda prisoners, top 10 Al Qaeda prisoners, that get nabbed. That's who you talk to. I go and spend 6 hours with, an Al Qaeda leader who was in charge of, the Diyala province or out in the Western provinces, and try to find out what's their end game, what's their strategy, who else working with them, where are the other cells, how are they gaining their finances? You had to figure out, how do I convince an uncooperative person to want to cooperate and talk? And it really involved a lot of negotiations and a lot of manipulating to get what you need. There had to be a lot of give and take. And these guys weren't idiots. I mean, I would say half my prisoners had masters and PhDs. More than half of them spoke fluent English. They weren't idiots. They really did have a sense of what they were doing and how they were doing it. So it was a very intellectually challenging job to work and do. And I like to be able to place that into the books. When we're dealing with a terrorist leader or different organizations, we can put some of that experience in there. Also, when you write these different combat scenes, I remember sitting in my office when a 240 millimeter rocket landed a couple hundred meters away from our building and shook the heck out of it. Like, the explosion happens, and for a split second, you can see the dust just bounce off of the table before the ceiling tiles imploded. You can feel that concussion. As a contractor driving around those up armored suburban vehicles with triple canopy and Blackwater, what you can feel what it's like when you have bullets ricocheting off your armored windows. That's a terrifying feeling. And when you can take those feelings and put that into your writing, it just makes it so much more real. And that's what a lot of veterans say to us all the time when they read our books. They're like, oh my God, this literally brought me right back to the situation when I was over there myself. And I think readers like that because it's incredibly authentic.
Yeah, I think that's what's so cool. Recently, like you and other writers that I've interviewed that write military type thrillers, they all have a lot of experience in the military, in combat. So it really makes it for the reader like myself who hasn't been in combat, it makes it really a fascinating and thrilling read. So.
Yeah, well, I think one of the other keys to success we've had is we really, really integrate our readers into our writing. So, for instance, when I have a new book that I'm working on, like right now with the Monroe Doctrine, I have 20 beta readers that I'm working on with this. So these guys work in the Pentagon. They work in different positions. They have all kinds of expertise that I don't necessarily have. So I leverage their expertise in these different fields. I served in the Army for 6 years and in the Air Force for 4 years. So I understand those components and branches pretty well, but I don't understand the Navy. So I've got a couple guys, like I got a chief master, petty officer who is helping me write some of the naval scenes. I've got a submarine officer who's helping me write a few of those scenes. I've got a force recon guy who's helping me with some of those. I've got an SDF guy for another one, a SEAL for a different position. So these guys are actually going in there and helping me craft the individual scenes to make them very real when it comes to the terminology and how things would play out. And then you take those recommendations, you integrate it into the whole book. And next thing you know, you've got this just incredible, experience that you created for the reader.
And you found the beta readers through your readers, is that how you came across?
So through all our back matter of our books, we encourage people to contact us through our Facebook groups. And then we have private reader groups people can join. I've got a little over 380 people in one of them, I think, right now. And when it comes time to, put out for the beta readers, we just say, okay, if you want to be part of it this time round, it's not a requirement. If you want to be part of it this time around, you got to send us a DM, and they let us know, and we add them to the list, and then the document goes out in a very specific format, and then we give them a timeline, and they read it over, check it out, send us their comments back, and then when the book's released, they post the reviews. Obviously, per Amazon guides, you can't tell them how to review, but at the end of the day, we just want an honest review. Let us know what you think, and tell the readers what they should expect.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great system you got set up too. Because that's it's good that you said you had the timeline. Because that's what I found. I had troubles when I was using betas. Was I never hear back from them. So that's good that you have a structured flow going.
And honestly, if they're not going to fulfill the timeline, then you just annotate it. And you figure out, which are the ones that are steady, reliable, dependable ones you can count on, and the ones that are not, you just decide, okay, am I just going to send this to you as an event, for a review of the book, or are you actually going to help me out, and you kind of figure those things out.
Yeah. And so I was kind of curious now with everything that's gone on in 2020 and 2020, were you, did the pandemic change anything with your writing process or your workflow?
Oh, significantly. So I have three kids. I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old.
Oh,
And the pandemic was rough, to say the least, because our daughter was in school, and then in March she wasn't. And our son was in school, and suddenly he wasn't. Our son has some special needs too, so his Montessori school really helps him with a lot of that. And then, when his structure is removed, that's when he has a little bit more issues. And so it was very, very challenging because we didn't have that childcare in school system like that for 6 weeks. And then we eventually just had to homeschool my daughter, and my son, wasn't able to go back to his school until the fall, which is just brutal. So it really impacted us a lot. It put us behind schedule tremendously. We actually had to push the release of Monroe Doctrine back 60 full days because of that. So right now we're in the process of still kind of getting ourselves caught back up again. And I think as long as they don't shut down schools again on us and keep things going, we should be fine.
that's amazing how this has impacted us in the whole world. It's just been a surreal.
Like, I got a friend of mine from college. She owns and runs a small thrift store up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and it really hurt her bad too because she's a newly single mom with three kids, and her husband works for the city, and so he would help out when he could. But she had to have the three kids working at the thrift shop with her because there wasn't school for her to have the kids in there. And so that was quite challenging for her to manage this thrift shop and have her three kids there because she couldn't leave them at home, and they couldn't go to school. So it's quite a unique challenge that it placed everyone in.
Yeah. Hopefully things get better this year. So fingers crossed. We shall see. So you said you were a big reader before you became an author. Were you a fan of thrillers and that type of genre?
Yes and no. I mean, I read a lot of different types of books. So I read. I was really big into reading a lot of Harry Turtledove books. He writes alternate history books. He's a Canadian author, or Australian author. I really liked a lot of his different take on history and books and how things could have turned out slightly different. So I'd read a lot of his. I'd read a lot of alternate World War II books. I read a fair bit of Tom Clancy's style of books and what he wrote. Harold Coyle was another one of my favorite authors I used to read. And then I started to discover the independent authors probably in 2014, 2015. And mostly actually is because of price, because I was looking at it, I was like paying $15 for an ebook from a trad pub, and I was like, I could get a self-published author for $3 and $5, so I could get 2 or 3 times as many books. And I started reading a lot of different authors that way, and it really opened my eyes to the whole process, because I realized, well, heck, man, these guys could write these books and self-publish, and why can't I? And that's when I said, I'm going to get into this myself and start doing it. And it's kind of been off to the races ever since then, because for me, I got into writing as PTSD therapy. My counselor at the VA was saying, well, just write for therapy. And so I started doing that and turning, these therapy sessions into stories, and then stories into books. And it's just kind of been a good cathartic experience ever since, and that I've just stuck with.
And what is your writing process? Do you outline these your books, or do you just kind of write by the seat of your pants?
I'm a bit of a pantser, so I have a rough idea of I know where the series is going to start, and I know where the series is going to end. Now, how I get to that end is a little left up to my own devices. So each book I sit down and I say, all right, chapter, I write down the different chapters, and I write down usually anywhere from 2 to 4 major things I want to cover in that chapter. And I'll write out all the chapters like that. And then I'll look at the whole outline and say, okay, this is what we're covering here, here, and here. Sometimes I'll move some things around. Now, obviously, the story can change as you're writing it, and you may realize you need to insert a new scene or insert a new chapter to help make it flow. But generally, that's kind of how I write. I don't have a very strict, 10-page outline like some authors do, and I'm very rigid on how I follow this whole thing. I recognize that a story needs to flow and go the way it needs to go to be successful, and so I run it that way.
What do you use to write your books? Do you use like Word or another
Yeah, I'm
software?
a Microsoft guy. I just, I could never. I used a MacBook Pro for work one time, and I had that for a year. And it's not that I had anything against it. I was just more comfortable using Microsoft Word and the just the Microsoft systems. I just use PC systems, to be honest with you. It's not that I have anything against the Macs. It's just the Macs are really expensive, and when I was writing on a budget, I just couldn't afford them. And now that I'm so used to using PCs, it's just the thought of converting to a Mac is just,
Yeah.
I don't want to lose productivity. I don't want to lose 2 or 3 months while I'm trying to figure out those new computer system. I just want to keep plugging away.
Yeah, that's like I said. You got your process down, so yeah, I wouldn't want to mess with it either. What's a typical writing day for you? What's the like when you sit down to write? What's your day like?
Sure. So, all right. It's like on a Monday morning, I'll get up at 5 o'clock. I'm out the door at 5:30 to go to the gym, hit the gym for an hour, come home. I usually will take my one of my kids to school. I come back and I start work at 8:30, and then I'll try to write for probably a good like 6 7 hours, and then take a couple hour break to spend time with the kids. Right now, my daughter, my 1 year old's a little fussy at dinner, so I take her for a 45-minute walk while my wife makes dinner, and then the other kids can eat dinner with her. And me and my daughter get to spend some time together on a walk, and then come back home. And once they're down for bed, usually I'll try and get another couple hours of writing. So typically, I try to get between 7 and 10 hours of work done per day, and that's usually at least 6 days a week, sometimes 7. Um, because I look at it this way: this is a startup. This is a startup business. I'm going to grind and grind and grind for 5 or 6 years to get this business to a certain income threshold and a certain volume of books and audiobooks done, and then I can start to slow down a little bit. But until I hit that certain level, right now I'm in the building phase of building the business and acquiring readers. And I just got to push hard to do that, because I know if I push hard doing this for basically my first 5 to 7 years of building this business, I'm going to have an enormous payoff down the road, and I'm not going to have to work quite as hard at this. But if I slack off now, I'm just going to make it. It's just going to be very hard to hit that plateau,
And doing and writing too. I mean, that's it takes so much mental wise. Kind of I like how you compare it to like a startup, like those techie guys who are like programming for 20 hours a day basically.
Well, it is. You have a series. So like each of my books, I write series. I don't write individual books, because series is how you make money.
Mm-hmm.
So usually it's about a 5 to 6 book series. You figure if it takes you, say, 2 months to write a book, and there's 6 books in this series, that's going to take you 12 months to write that series. And then you're going to have to go through some different editing processes and periods as well. So that's why when I start a series from the first release to the last release, it's usually 18 months. So that's the world you kind of live in for that period. But once that first book is done, like when I finished the Falling Empire series, when book 5 was done of that series, I was already working on book 3 of the science fiction series. I was already planning to release over the fall. So as soon as one series is ended, I literally am starting in on the next series and working on cranking it out. So by the time one series ends, I'm usually 2 to 3 books or more into creating the next series. So it's ready to roll. And that way there's literally no gap, no break. I roll my entire audience from one series into the next series and into each of those books. And if I can continue to carry that over and do that, you can make a very good income, because I'm not having to remarket and retarget those readers. Because if 30 to 40% of those readers finish a book and roll into the new series, that saves me from having to retarget them. I don't have to go find them again.
Yeah, I love it. I love how you're like 18 months ahead. So you're not, because that's that feeling when you're like behind and you got to get you need to get the book out and you stress yourself out. I mean, not that, what you're not doing is stressful, but yeah, I love it that you're so high advanced already. Planning your next series or your next books.
Well, you're only as good as your last book. You're only as good as your last series. So you got to keep them going. And my wife and I both have graduate degrees. I went to Oxford, and I owe a lot of student loans. So I want to get those paid off, and that means you got to write some more books. So I'm quite motivated to get that taken care of.
So the volume 1 of the Monroe Doctrine is out on January 29th, like we said. And then what's next? What are you working on now? What's coming out next?
So we got book 1 comes out on the 29th. We got book 2 coming out on March 30th. I don't have book 3 up just yet, but it will probably get released in the summer, early summer. And then in the early summer, we also have book 4 of our science fiction book coming out as well. So we got quite a few that we've got a lot of irons in the fire, a lot of different things going right now. There's another new series I'm working on with another author. He was one of my beta readers, another veteran that kind of got him into writing as PTSD therapy. And now he's published 3 books, and we're working on a joint book on an alternate history of the Gulf War. What if Saddam had not stopped in Kuwait and decided to invade Saudi Arabia? And so I'm working on this series with him. He was actually a battalion commander in the 101st Airborne in that war, so he has firsthand accounting of it. And we've got the first book done. He's halfway done with book 2, and we're going to start releasing that series over the summer. We actually have General David Petraeus is going to write us a foreword and a review for the book. Him and Matt went to War College together, so they're friends and know each other. And we're really looking forward to releasing a series together like that. So it's just going to be a 3-book series, but it'll be quite fun to write.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And it's so cool how that it's helped you guys with the PTSD and all that. That's just amazing and so cool. So thanks. The
problem is when veterans have a mission and a purpose when they're in the military and when you're overseas. Yeah. And then when you come home, you suddenly don't have that mission, that purpose anymore. And that's when the PTSD strikes really bad because they've lost that mission, that purpose. But if we can give them a new mission, a new purpose, writing books, creating cool content, creating stuff their kids want to read or friends want to read, but more than that, they actually can make money and support their families with this, like make enough money to buy a car and pay your mortgage and go on a vacation. They start to develop a new sense of purpose, a new mission in life. And when you can give them that, their PTSD symptoms will start to become more manageable and controlled. And ultimately, I think it's one of the more effective ways to combat veteran suicide because you are giving them that mission, that purpose. And so for me, I'm trying to help other veterans do that. So I've got 3 veterans that I'm mentoring in writing this year. My goal is to work with just a couple of them at a time, teach them how to fish, get them fishing and being productive. And then, they can go off on their own, being able to support themselves and do that. And then if this process works out, then I'll take on a couple more and I'll continue to perpetually do this over time in addition to working and publishing my own works.
That is fantastic. So cool. Love that. So where can the listeners find you? Is there a website or what's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, so we have a couple of things. You could either look us up on frontlinepublishing.com. You can find us there. You can find us on Facebook under James Rosone and Miranda Watson. And you can also look up James Rosone on Patreon or Frontline Publishing on Patreon, because we have a Patreon site as well for those who want to help us, who want to provide a financial help with this mentorship program. Sponsor a vet, basically.
I love it. All right. And I'll have links on the website as well for listeners. But that's awesome. All right. So thank you so much, James. Really enjoyed talking to you about your work and your service. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and I look forward to talking with you guys again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. If you have a moment, please do check out thrillingreads.com/links, where you'll be able to rate and review this podcast, or simply rate this podcast wherever it is that you're listening to it, be it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Audible, Amazon Music, whichever podcast app you prefer. Please take a moment to rate this podcast. It's the best way to help other fans of mystery and thriller books to find the podcast, and it helps me get the word out, and so it's the best way to support the podcast, so I do appreciate that. And if you're interested, you can join my Thrilling Reads mailing list. You'll find the sign-up form at thrillingreads.com/links. Once you subscribe for free, you'll be notified about discounts and deals on great books in the mystery, thriller, and crime fiction genres. You'll also find my social media links and my author website over at thrillingreads.com/links. So check it out and say hi. All right, take care and stay safe until we meet again on the next episode of Meet the Thriller Author.